You're somewhere over northern France in the spring of 1944, and the war is eating airplanes faster than factories can replace them. The P-47 Thunderbolt is the American answer to attrition. 7 tons of brute aluminum and a 2,000 horsepower engine designed to escort bombers, smash trains, and come home full of holes. But even the toughest machine runs out of luck. On May 15th, Lieutenant Harold Hal Simmons of the 362nd Fighter Group is hit by flak during a low-level attack near Amiens. One shell tears through the right wing, ruptures an oil line, and the engine begins to cough smoke. He climbs, looking for altitude, but the R-2800 seizes halfway through the maneuver. He's too low to bail out, too high to survive a crash. He picks a meadow and prays. The Thunderbolt hits hard, skids through wet grass, and stops upright against a hedgerow. Simmons crawls out dazed, pistol in hand, but the first sound he hears isn't friendly voices. It's German. A local patrol of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division surrounds the wreck within minutes. They expect a burned-out wreck, maybe a few souvenirs. What they find instead is a mostly intact American fighter, big as a truck, still warm from combat. The lieutenant is taken away under guard, and the Germans move in on the airplane. They've captured Allied aircraft before, Mustangs, Spitfires, Lightnings, but never one of these monsters. Even stripped of paint and riddled with holes, the P-47 looks alien to them. The fuselage is enormous, the armor thick as boilerplate. One sergeant taps the side of the cowling with his rifle butt and laughs. Panzer mit Flügeln, he says, a tank with wings. By nightfall, the local Luftwaffe recovery team has cordoned off the field. Floodlights, guards, tarps. Officers from a nearby airfield arrive with cameras and notebooks. Every inch of the Thunderbolt is photographed, every marking traced. The stenciled code on the tail reads, HVM. The ground crew chief, Oberfeldwebel Kruger, writes in his report, unusually large single-engine fighter, radial motor of exceptional diameter, likely Pratt & Whitney, damage localized, recommend recovery for analysis. At dawn, 2 FAMO half-tracks arrive, towing a flatbed trailer. The Germans cut the wings at the root and lift the fuselage with chains, mud dripping from the landing gear. Civilians watch from the hedgerows as the convoy rattles east toward Beauvais, then farther, to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's secret testing ground, where every captured Allied aircraft is dissected. For the Germans, this is more than curiosity. The war's turning. They've seen the Thunderbolt strafing trains, airfields, and convoys with impunity. Now, for the first time, they have one in their hands. In the convoy's lead truck sits Hauptmann Erich Meyer, an engineer from the Rechlin Test Center. He studies the plane through the rear window and can't help thinking it looks wrong. It's too heavy, too blunt, too crude. German design is precision, balance, efficiency. This thing is excess made metal. But it flies, and it kills. Meyer opens his notebook and writes one question on the first line. Why does this beast work? By the time the captured Thunderbolt reaches Rechlin, rain is falling and the test hangars glow under blackout lights. Mechanics swarm over the trailer, wiping oil, measuring impact angles, cataloging bullet scars. The Americans built this airplane to survive punishment, and it has. Proof in steel and rivets. To the men watching, it feels like they've dragged in a dead animal that refuses to admit it's dead. The war in the air is changing, and they can feel it. The Luftwaffe has spent years perfecting agility and elegance. The Americans, it seems, have perfected something else entirely. Endurance. The Germans don't know it yet, but this single wreck, lying under tarpaulin in a hangar north of Berlin, will shake their faith in everything they think they understand about air combat. The captured Thunderbolt sleeps under guard that night, silent, rain tapping its wings. In the morning, the engineers will begin to take it apart, and piece by piece, they will discover that the real shock isn't what the Americans built, it's what they believed. Rechlin wasn't a normal airfield. It was the brain of the Luftwaffe, a quiet cluster of hangars and workshops deep in Mecklenburg, ringed by forest and barbed wire. Every foreign aircraft that fell into German hands ended up here. Allied intelligence knew it existed, but not what went on inside. Even most Luftwaffe pilots had never seen it. The men who worked here called it Die Clinic, the clinic, because what they did was dissection. They studied captured machines the way a surgeon studies an enemy's anatomy, to find its strengths, its weaknesses, and its secrets. The convoy from France rolled through the gates just before midnight. Rain slicked the concrete, and the guards at the checkpoint stepped aside to wave it through. Under the tarpaulin on the flatbed, the Thunderbolt's silver skin glimmered under flashes of lightning. When the truck stopped beside Hangar 7, technicians and engineers were already waiting. Hauptmann Meyer stepped down first, coat pulled tight, and signed the delivery manifest. In the corner of the document, someone had written the phrase, U.S. fighter, type unknown. They pulled the tarpaulin away, and for a moment, everyone just stared. The P-47 didn't look like a fighter at all. It looked like a mistake, a monster built without concern for beauty or proportion. The cowling was absurdly wide, the wings thick, the fuselage tall enough that a man could walk under the belly without stooping. It was the opposite of everything German design believed in. Mayer circled it slowly, his boots echoing on the hangar floor. He ran a gloved hand across the pitted aluminum, the scorched paint. Near the cockpit, stenciled in black, were the words, "No step." He smiled at the irony. They began work before dawn. Floodlights hissed to life, and a dozen mechanics set about stabilizing the wreck. The wings were damaged, but not destroyed. The engine cowling was dented, but the propeller blades were still attached, their tips twisted from the crash. The cockpit canopy had popped open on impact, but the instruments inside looked untouched. The first task was identification. German intelligence had already recovered fragments of American planes before, P-38 Lightnings, P-51 Mustangs, even a wrecked B-17 turret. But this was different. The Thunderbolt was a mystery. Its size, its layout, even the massive radial engine defied easy classification. Mayer ordered the engine exposed. It took 6 men with wrenches and pry bars to remove the cowling. What they revealed made the mechanics stop and whistle. The Pratt & Whitney R2800, 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, a labyrinth of pipes, filters, and armor plating. It was enormous. Twice the weight of a Daimler-Benz DB605, yet somehow it drove the Thunderbolt faster than most German fighters at low altitude. "Look at this madness," one technician muttered. "It's like a factory under the hood." Mayer leaned in close, inspecting the intercooler ducts and the turbocharger system. The Americans had hidden a small miracle inside all that metal, a self-contained supercharging loop that kept full power at any altitude. To a German engineer used to sleek inline engines, it looked like chaos, pipes running everywhere, cooling lines crisscrossing like veins. But the more Mayer studied it, the more he saw order in the chaos. The design wasn't refined, but it was robust. It didn't need delicacy, it needed to survive. He took notes in his small leather book. Overbuilt, redundant systems, accessible maintenance, prioritizes durability over performance. Then another line, designed for mechanics, not artists. By midday, the Thunderbolt's cockpit was open, and the technicians were mapping every gauge, switch, and label. The English text fascinated them. Supercharger, boost, fuel pressure, cowl flaps. The cockpit felt huge compared to the cramped Messerschmitts. Every control was spaced out, easy to reach, clearly labeled. One engineer remarked that an American farmer could probably fly it after an hour of instruction. Mayer didn't laugh. That was the point. The Americans had built an airplane for production, not perfection. Something thousands of men could fly, repair, and replace without needing to be aces. The P-47 wasn't about mastery. It was about scale. That evening, Colonel Kurt Bruckner, the head of the captured aircraft division, came to inspect the find. He was tall, precise, his uniform immaculate. Mayer gave a brief report. Condition: 70% intact. Engine recoverable. Minimal structural warping. Recommend reconstruction for flight testing. Bruckner circled the plane with an expression that mixed fascination and contempt. "It's ugly," he said finally. "Yes, Herr Oberst, but it works." Bruckner tapped the cowling with his riding crop. "Can you make it fly again?" Mayer hesitated. "With parts from similar engines, yes. We'll need propeller blades and fuel compatible with American specifications. But it's possible." "Good," Bruckner said. "Berlin wants results. Find out why these Thunderbolts can take so much punishment. Our pilots are complaining that they empty their guns into them, and they keep flying. I want to know why." As the colonel left, Mayer turned back to the machine. The hangar lights cast a pale glow over the riveted skin. He could still smell the oil and the faint, sweet trace of burnt aviation fuel. It didn't feel like they had captured an enemy. It felt like they had captured the future. That night, he sat alone at his desk and wrote in his report. Observation: American design philosophy prioritizes survivability over elegance. Each system is heavy, redundant, and over-engineered, yet collectively effective. This machine cannot outturn or outclimb ours, but it endures. It is designed to take damage, continue fighting, and return home. In this, it reflects not just engineering, but national character. Outside, rain drummed against the hangar roof. The Thunderbolt lay under canvas once again, its wings spread like a sleeping animal. Tomorrow they would drain the oil, strip the guns, and begin to rebuild it. The Luftwaffe's engineers didn't know it yet, but as they tightened each bolt and replaced each panel, they were preparing to confront something larger than machinery. They were about to face an idea that strength wasn't grace, and beauty couldn't stop. The first attempt to bring the American fighter back to life began on a cold morning in late June 1944. The war had turned grim for Germany. Reports from the front were all the same. Bombers by the thousands, the sky dark with contrails, and American fighters that seemed to multiply like insects. Rechlin, isolated and silent in its pine forest, felt like the eye of a dying storm. Yet inside Hangar 7, the mood was almost reverent. The Thunderbolt had been reborn. It had taken 3 weeks of scavenging and improvisation to get it ready. German mechanics had rebuilt the landing gear from scratch, using modified FW-190 actuators. The original propeller blades, twisted and scarred, were replaced with hand-balanced copies milled from Messerschmitt stock. They had cleaned every inch of the R2800 engine, checked the turbo ducts, and filled it with synthetic fuel blended to mimic American 100 octane. It wasn't perfect. The fuel mixture burned hotter, the oil ran thicker, but it would have to do. When the moment came, the test field was cleared. Only a skeleton crew of officers, engineers, and guards remained. Cameras were mounted on tripods. Mayer stood beside the runway with a clipboard, watching as the pilot climbed into the cockpit. The test pilot's name was Oberleutnant Hans Seifert, tall, lean, a veteran of the Eastern Front. He had flown Bf-109s, FW-190s, even a captured Spitfire. He looked at the American cockpit and laughed under his breath. "Big as a living room," he said. "I could take my breakfast in here." Mayer handed him the checklist, translated from English. "Keep it low," he said. "If the turbo misbehaves, throttle back immediately. It may overspin." Seifert nodded, strapped in, and pressed the starter. The engine coughed once, then another time, then caught. The sound was unlike anything the Germans had heard. Not the sharp metallic snarl of a Daimler-Benz inline, but a deep, rolling thunder that made the hangar walls vibrate. The whole airfield seemed to shudder as the 18 cylinders came alive. The mechanics stepped back, grinning despite themselves. "It sounds like artillery," one shouted. Seifert advanced the throttle, tested the controls, and taxied to the edge of the runway. The Thunderbolt's wide stance made it lumber across the tarmac like a beast waking from hibernation. When the signal came, he pushed the throttle forward. The plane surged ahead, tail lifting almost lazily, and then, impossibly, it was airborne. The crowd held its breath. The massive fighter climbed into the gray morning light, its engine leaving a dark spiral of exhaust behind. Mayer raised his binoculars and watched as Seifert leveled off at 1,000 meters. The radio crackled with static. "Controls heavy," Seifert reported, his voice calm. "But stable. Feels like flying a door. Speed? 320. Climbing slowly. It wants to go straight." That was the first surprise. Every German fighter they'd built was twitchy, responsive, eager, a knife-edge machine. The Thunderbolt felt like something else entirely, a force that preferred momentum over finesse. 10 minutes into the flight, Seifert began testing the systems. He cycled the flaps, opened the cowl flaps, and throttled back to check engine temperatures. Temperatures holding, oil pressure good. It flies like a train. "Any vibration?" Mayer asked. "Only from the engine, but solid. No flutter, no stall warning." He took it higher, pushing through 3,000 meters. The turbocharger whined as it spooled up, a strange rising wail that echoed over the radio. "Turbo engaged," Seifert said. "Power increasing. This thing climbs better than it should." Down below, Mayer took notes. The German engineers had expected chaos, instability, shaking, the heavy fighter barely able to hold altitude. Instead, the Thunderbolt performed with a kind of brute confidence. It wasn't graceful, but it was unstoppable. Then came the real test. Mayer asked him to simulate a dive and recovery, the same maneuver American pilots used for attack runs. Seifert rolled into a shallow descent, throttle forward. The Thunderbolt picked up speed faster than expected. 400, 450, 500. "Ease up," Mayer warned. "Still stable," Seifert replied, but his voice had changed, a hint of disbelief. "Control response stiff but smooth. Feels like it wants to go faster." He pulled back hard on the stick. The aircraft responded with ponderous grace, climbing again without wobble. The altimeter needle spun. Mayer heard the pilot laughing through the radio. "I think I understand why they fly it so low," he said. "It's not fast because of the engine. It's fast because nothing can knock it off course." After 20 minutes, Seifert brought the Thunderbolt down. The landing was rough. The wide undercarriage bounced once, twice, then settled with a heavy thud. The propeller wound down to silence. When the canopy opened, his face was flushed with adrenaline. "What do you think?" Mayer asked. Seifert unbuckled his harness and climbed down. "It shouldn't fly," he said simply. "But it does. And once it's in the air, it feels immortal." That afternoon, they gathered in the control room to review the data. Fuel flow steady, oil temperature stable, structural stress within limits. The only note of concern came from the mechanics. Engine overspeed risk at high boost due to fuel differences. Otherwise, the verdict was unanimous. The Thunderbolt was flightworthy. In the following days, Seifert flew it again, this time against a captured Spitfire and a standard FW-190A for comparison. The results were unsettling. In turning combat, the Thunderbolt lost easily. But in dives and low-level passes, it outpaced everything. It shrugged off hits that would have crippled any German plane. When Seifert deliberately fired 20mm test rounds at the belly armor from the ground range, they barely dented it. By the end of the week, Mayer's report reached Berlin. His conclusion was stark. At low altitude, this aircraft cannot be intercepted by conventional fighters. Its speed in descent and resilience make standard interception tactics ineffective. Recommend immediate study of countermeasures. That night, Mayer walked alone along the dark runway, the smell of burned fuel still in the air. Somewhere behind him, the Thunderbolt sat in the hangar, its skin gleaming under floodlights. It was no longer just a captured enemy machine. It was a mirror, one that showed how far the Luftwaffe had fallen behind. He thought of Seifert's words. "It feels immortal." Maybe that was the secret. The Americans hadn't built it to win duels. They'd built it to survive the war. Word of the tests spread quietly through Rechlin. The Thunderbolt had become a rumor, whispered among engineers and test pilots who swore they had seen something impossible. A machine too heavy to fly, too crude to win, yet capable of outrunning and outliving anything Germany could build. To most of the Luftwaffe, the story sounded like propaganda. But inside Hangar 7, the truth was stranger than rumor. The Americans had built a monster that refused to die. By early July 1944, the testing program had entered its next phase. Direct comparison trials. The order from Berlin was blunt. Determine how this aircraft survives what kills ours. Mayer and Seifert designed a series of controlled experiments to measure structural stress, dive recovery, and damage tolerance. It quickly became an exercise in humiliation. The first test pitted the Thunderbolt against a brand new FW-190A8, flown by another Rechlin pilot, Oberleutnant Dieter Voll. The goal was simple: low-altitude pursuit. Two aircraft, same altitude, parallel runs over the tree line, simulated attack conditions. Mayer stood on the observation tower with binoculars as the engines roared to life. The Focke-Wulf was the pride of German engineering, sleek, responsive, deadly. The Thunderbolt looked like a factory accident beside it. They made their run at dawn, engines howling as they skimmed the forest. From above, the contrast was shocking. The FW-190 darted and weaved, agile but nervous. The Thunderbolt stayed flat, steady as a freight train, plowing through turbulence without a twitch. When Wall pulled up to climb, Seifert stayed level, and in seconds, the American plane was gone, vanishing into ground haze. When they landed, Wall stormed out of his cockpit, face red. "It's not possible," he snapped. "It's heavier than a bomber." Mayer only nodded. "Yes," he said, "and that's why you can't catch it." The next series of tests was harsher. They loaded both aircraft with live ammunition and fired at identical steel plates mounted along the runway. The FW-190's guns shredded the targets cleanly, but its ammunition stores emptied after 6 seconds. The Thunderbolt's 8 Brownings fired for nearly 20. The plates glowed red, metal curling at the edges. The German technicians watched in stunned silence. "It's not a fighter," one of them muttered. "It's a flying machine gun." Then came the damage trials. Mechanics patched bullet holes into the Thunderbolt's wings and fuselage to simulate combat hits. They removed pieces of armor, severed lines, and even fired test rounds into the tail section before flight. Each time, Seifert took off, and each time, he brought it back. The plane didn't care. It bled oil, leaked fuel, but it flew. Finally, they staged a mock dogfight. Seifert in the Thunderbolt, Wall again in the FW-190. Altitude, 1,000 meters. Engagement range, visual. The two planes met head-on and broke in opposite directions. Wall dove first, looping into a climbing turn, his usual move to regain altitude advantage. Seifert did something that made the observers gasp. He didn't follow. He went down, straight down. The Thunderbolt's nose dropped toward the forest, engine screaming. The altimeter needle spun. The ground came up like a wall. Mayer's hands clenched on the railing. "Pull up, Hans, pull up," he whispered into the radio. At the last moment, the plane leveled off, 50 feet above the trees, the propeller tips shredding leaves. Wall dove after him, but hesitated. The ground was too close. He backed off, climbed, and lost sight of his opponent. Seconds later, Seifert's voice came over the radio, breathless and amused. "He's gone. I could fly through his shadow before he sees me." Mayer stared down at his notes. The numbers made no sense. At that altitude, radar couldn't track, flak couldn't lock, and pursuit was suicide. The Americans hadn't found a tactic. They'd found a loophole in physics. That evening, Seifert gave his debriefing to a silent room of officers. "At high altitude, our aircraft are superior," he said. "At ground level, this one is untouchable. It can dive, attack, and disappear before you even react. We can't fight it down there. We can't even see it." Colonel Bruckner sat back in his chair, expression hard. "You're suggesting we abandon altitude combat?" "I'm suggesting that if the enemy keeps fighting like this, altitude won't matter," Seifert replied. "They don't play our game anymore." The words hung in the air. It was more than a tactical observation. It was heresy. The Luftwaffe had built its entire doctrine on altitude dominance, energy tactics, and precision attack. And here was a captured American machine, quietly proving that all of it was obsolete. Later that night, Mayer and Seifert stood outside the hangar, smoking in silence. The distant rumble of Allied bombers rolled through the clouds, hundreds of engines, like thunder beyond the horizon. Mayer exhaled slowly. "We thought we could outthink them, build something faster, lighter, cleverer." Seifert nodded. "They built something dumber, but it doesn't die." For the first time since the war began, Mayer felt something close to despair. Not because the Thunderbolt was unbeatable, no machine was, but because it represented a kind of warfare Germany could no longer afford. The Americans could build 10,000 of these iron beasts, lose 100, and send 100 more the next day. The Luftwaffe could build perfection, but perfection took time, and time was the one resource they no longer had. When he returned to his quarters, Mayer opened his notebook and wrote a single line under the day's entry. "We used to believe the sky belonged to those who mastered it. Now it belongs to those who can survive it." Outside, the hangar lights flickered off one by one, leaving the field in darkness. Inside, the Thunderbolt stood alone, oil still dripping from its belly, a foreign machine in a dying empire. The Germans had learned what it was, how it worked, and why it was built. What they didn't yet understand was that it wasn't the airplane that frightened them. It was what it said about the men who built it. The report from Rechlin reached Berlin in late July 1944, carried in a sealed leather pouch marked Geheime Kommandosache, top secret. Inside were 50 pages of data, photographs, stress charts, and the now famous conclusion written in Mayer's neat script. The American P-47 demonstrates unmatched durability and performance at low altitude. It represents a fundamental shift in combat doctrine. Existing Luftwaffe tactics are insufficient against this design. The document passed from one pair of hands to another, from the Air Technical Office to the Inspectorate of Fighters, and finally, to the desk of General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland himself. Galland had been a fighter pilot before he became a bureaucrat, and he still smelled of tobacco and aviation fuel. He had read hundreds of technical reports over the years, most of them dull. This one stopped him cold. He summoned his senior engineers, commanders, and test pilots for an emergency conference at Tempelhof. Mayer was ordered to attend. It was his first time in Berlin since before the war. The city now half ruined, its streets cratered and blackened, the sky streaked with contrails from endless Allied raids. The meeting was held in an underground briefing room that smelled of dust and sweat. Galland sat at the head of the table, a cigarette burning between his fingers. The mood was brittle, the air thick with unspoken frustration. Mayer presented his findings carefully, showing photographs of the Thunderbolt's armor, engine layout, and turbo system. "Gentlemen," he said, "this aircraft is not superior in speed or maneuverability. It is superior in endurance. It can absorb damage we would consider fatal. It is designed for pilots of average skill to survive multiple missions." One officer snorted. "Then their pilots must be cowards." Mayer met his eyes. "Cowards who are still alive." A murmur rippled through the room. Gallon raised a hand for silence. Go on. The Americans have abandoned our obsession with altitude and agility, Mayer continued. They use altitude for their bombers, yes, but their fighters now operate almost at ground level. Fast, brutal, invisible to radar. We've confirmed reports of Thunderbolts attacking airfields and supply lines at treetop height. Our radar cannot detect them until it's too late. Colonel Bruckner added quietly, Our flat crews report the same. The aircraft are too fast and too low. The ground clutter blinds the instruments. Gallon leaned back, exhaling smoke. So, what do you propose, Herr Meyer? That we start flying tanks? There was a ripple of uneasy laughter, but Mayer didn't smile. Not tanks, General. Survivors. Machines that can take hits, keep flying, and protect their pilots. Right now, our fighters demand perfection. A single mistake, a coolant leak, an overspeed, a fuel line puncture, and the aircraft is lost. The Americans have accepted imperfection and engineered around it. Another general, an older man with a chest full of medals, spoke sharply. That is not the German way. We fight with skill, not brute force. Precision wins wars. Mayer's voice was calm but cold. And yet we are losing. Silence. Even Gallon looked down for a moment. The map of Europe on the wall showed the front line inching closer to the Reich. Finally, Gallon stubbed out his cigarette and said, Show me your numbers. Mayer opened his folder. Wing loading, 50 pounds per square foot. Gross weight 7 tons. Engine output 2,000 horsepower. Maximum dive speed over 500 miles per hour. Armor capable of deflecting 20mm fire at shallow angles. Operational losses among American units flying this aircraft have decreased by 30% in the past 6 months. Gallon frowned. All from one machine? It is a pattern, sir, Mayer said. A doctrine. They're teaching their pilots to fight the way this machine was built. To survive first, to win second. It's not elegance, but it works. There was more discussion, heated and circular. Some wanted to copy elements of the Thunderbolt's design, reinforce the FW-190's undercarriage, add armor beneath the cockpit, simplify maintenance. Others dismissed the idea as fantasy. Germany's factories were already stretched to the breaking point. Aluminum, fuel, even skilled labor were vanishing. When the meeting broke for lunch, Gallon motioned for Mayer to stay. The room emptied, leaving only the general and the engineer. You understand what you're asking, Gallon said quietly. You're asking us to change the philosophy of our entire Air Force in the middle of a losing war. I'm asking us to survive it, Mayer replied. Gallon studied him for a long time. Do you believe the Americans know what they've done? Yes, Mayer said. They know exactly. They don't need the best pilots. They just need enough of them to come back tomorrow. That's how they'll win. Gallon sighed, looking at the ceiling as if he could see through it to the ruined city above. I flew in Spain, he said. Back then, we thought war was art. Now it's arithmetic. He flicked open the report again, reading the line Mayer had written weeks before. We build for artists. They build for survivors. When Mayer left the conference, Berlin was in blackout. Sirens wailed in the distance. He walked through the empty streets and watched the searchlights cross the clouds. Somewhere above, the same kind of aircraft he had dissected in Rechlin was roaring through the night, its engine note steady, confident, immune to the chaos below. Back in Rechlin, work on the captured Thunderbolt continued. The engineers tested fuel types, propeller angles, even armor composition. But the tone had changed. What began as curiosity had become respect, and behind that, something like envy. The Luftwaffe was running out of everything: men, metal, hope. Yet the Americans seemed to grow stronger by building machines that made mediocrity survivable. Mayer realized, with a kind of grim admiration, that the P-47 wasn't just a weapon. It was a philosophy cast in aluminum, the idea that a soldier's life mattered more than perfection. That idea terrified him more than the airplane itself, because if the enemy fought to preserve life while Germany kept throwing it away for pride, then the war's outcome was already decided. In his notebook that night, Mayer wrote one final thought before sleep claimed him. They build for tomorrow. We build for today. And today is almost over.